Rebbe's father was the previous Novominsker Rebbe. He came to America in the late 20s. My father was born in Brooklyn, grew up in East New York.
The Rebbe was American-born. He grew up in the 30s and the 40s when it was much harder to be what a bacher is today, and much more work was required of them.
When he was a bacher, it was right after the war, and then all the different refugees came. He would very vividly describe when the Mir Yeshiva came from Europe. The whole yeshiva came and they settled in that neighborhood. It made a big ocean on him. For Cheder, he went to elementary school in Teres Chaim in East New York. Before his bar mitzvah, he transferred to Sifta Chaim Berlin.
We were Bochrim together in Sifta Chaim Berlin. We were Bochrim and we learned B'chavrusa, mikvois. He remembered everything that we learned, had vast ideas, even as a young man. He was a very versatile person. We understood that he's going to be a big Manik B'Yisrael someday.
My father's two grandfathers were two prominent Rebbes in Poland. His mother's father was called the Sokolov Rebbe, who was a Kotzker Rebbe Zeinkel, but he was a very influential leader, I would say, in the Aguda. His other grandfather was more of a withdrawn, a different type of Rebbe, who was busy learning and davening all day. In a certain way, in his particular way, encompassed both types of personalities.
He obviously went through many stops along the way in his life, and all of that, I think, helped him form into the tremendous personality that he was.
He straddled different worlds, and he was successful in all of them, and the people appreciated his closeness to them in each of the areas.
The Chazal say everybody was able to find some sort of degree of relationship.
The Novominsker Rebbe was married to Eichenstein, and the wife's family was from Chicago. The Ziditshova Rebbe was his father-in-law. He taught first, I think, in the Tiferet Tzvi. It was called Beis Yaakov at that time. Then later on, he came to teach in the Skokie Yeshiva.
If I would read you who were the Rebbeim in the yeshiva at that time, it was amazing. There was Reb Zelig Star, Reb Herzl Kaplan, Reb Mendel Kaplan, Reb Mordechai Rogoff. Everyone's legendary. Everyone was called an Eloi when they were a kid, I was that type of person. And he was 31 years old. To us, as a ninth grader, he was one of the Chashuv Rosh Yeshivas of the yeshiva, just like all the rest of them. I had no idea until I was preparing for this interview that he was 30 years younger than all the rest of them. That's how Chashuv he was in our eyes.
He won us over right away. The way he spoke, the way he talked, the way he walked. I mean, Jack Reichenbach was the head of Torah Masorah, and Sidney Glenner, and Maurice Formers. These were people who became some of the major philanthropists, and they were, under his influence in Chicago. And amongst the Rabbanim, I know Yitzchak Hirschfeld, who became Rosh Yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, and Laser Silver was Rosh Yeshiva, and then Gedalia Finkel, Nachum Eisenstein, and Beryl Eisenstein. These were all people that were really tremendously influenced by the Rebbe.
You had the blend of the Lumdis with the Warmkeit and the boys, real American boys growing up with the Cubs and the White Sox. They were taken by it.
He also invited us to his home. We had Rosh Chodesh parties. I didn't know Rosh Chodesh was such a big simcha, but we always had these, tasty Rosh Chodesh parties, and his wife made special delicacies.
One time they came to his house, Shavuos, they walked 5 miles from yeshiva, and it was 90 degrees outside. And they came to sit down in the apartment, which was a fakroch and an air conditioner, and they all took off their jackets. And he says, Bachim, you keep your jackets on when you come to your Rebbe.
When he came to Washington Heights, the Rebbe really had 3 functions. He was the Rosh Yeshiva, and he was charged with trying to get the Beis Midrash to grow. In the hierarchy in the Kehillah, when the Rav was unable to speak on Shabbos, wasn't there, the Rosh Yeshiva would take over. And there was a Beis Yosef minyan in Washington Heights, known as the Aguda minyan, and he was the Rav of that minyan as well. We were so busy with the shmuzin that he gave, which really made our Yiddishkeit. It taught us what Yerushalayim means.
Even after he left that community, he would give a weekly shiur in Chumash every Thursday night. He would travel back from Brooklyn to Washington Heights, and later on he would give the shiur before each Yom Tov.
Many years later, there was a Hachnasa Sefer Torah in Novominsk, and the Rebbe asked Rav Schwab to speak and introduced him as my Rav from Washington Heights. And Rav Schwab answered, "It's a pleasure to be here with my Rebbe in Borough Park."
He writes in his first sefer that it was his father's asmada that really awoke in him the concept of really giving yourself away to limit the Torah.
I was very close to the Rebbe. I did not know until after his Patira what his Seder HaLimud was.
He began up very, very early in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, sometimes even earlier, and just learned for hours before davening. Those were his best times of the day.
He learned with his pen. As long as I remember, he would be writing.
He was writing these Adas Yaakov, tremendous works of Torah that Moshe Feinstein said also, this man is writing on Kol Torah.
They took his Sfarim 25 years ago when he was in his 40s, Trivel Yoshev, that he said he'd never seen such Sfarim before.
Some people are experts in the Shiva Torah. Some people are experts in Halacha. Some people are experts in Musar. Some people are experts in Hashkafa. Some people are experts in Chassidus. But it seemed like he had all of this in his mind.
He knew where all the psukim were. Like, you ever seen these statements and there's a pasuk in Amos, so there's a pasuk here, pasuk they say, wow, he didn't use a thesaurus, like he knew it.
I was in the car, I heard a tape, an hour tape. I must have heard 150 to 200 Gemaras.
Whether it was the Blat Shur on Sunday mornings or during the week, he gave shiurim on sugyas or halacha, or he went through the Brisker Rov Sefer, Simon by Simon, or he went through from Matovu and all through Shabbos, davening, and Yontif. His ability to be mechadish in areas of Tanakh, it was phenomenal, whatever you wanted.
Most people that know the Rebbe from when I started knowing the Rebbe. And if I wouldn't have known from inside, I would have thought, the Rebbe, the Rosh Aguda, and he was this and he was that. These things were all just responsibilities. That was not his interest. His interest was to sit down with a sefer.
The Rebbe was very uncomfortable with kavod. He was a reserved person by nature.
He lived with tremendous simplicity and tremendous aniyus. The Rebbetzin told me she didn't buy a dress for 10 years. She would baklug sich with Rebbetzin Palm, Zechrona Levracha. What are we going to wear by that good convention? Who are we going to borrow a dress from? The apartment that the Rebbe lived in the yeshiva building, the Bachram upstairs in the dormitory making noise, and that was the apartment the Novominsker Rebbe was living in. Total simplicity, there was nothing fancy there.
When the yeshiva started, I was about 25. It was the first Siyum Hashas that I attended. The Rebbe was the Messiah then.
Hadron aloch meseches nida v'hadro chalon. Darton aloch meseches nida v'darto chalon.
It was in Madison Square Garden. I see the Rebbe there. It was like larger than life. The next day, he calls me in. I started talking about this problem. He said, my name is Shimshi. Shimshon, whatever you're going to tell me, I'm going to do. I remember I was totally floored. This Yid, who was in front of 25,000 people, is telling me, young schnook, who doesn't even have a beard, whatever you tell me I'm going to do. My daughter's Chasna, my Mechutten, also a close Talmud with the Rebbe. So versteht sich, the Rebbe was asked by the Chosn side to be Masada Kedishin. And we're sitting by the Chosn's tish, and Rav Geli's Tzal walked in. And the Rebbe's face, I turned white. The Rav is here. I'm not going to be Masada Kedushin. I said, Rebbe, he's not makbid if it's only the color from Washington Heights. The Chassan is not living in Washington. He's not makbid. So I'm not Masada Kedushin without asking Rishus. Rosh Agudas Yisrael, Novominsker Rebbe, Zokim, Talmud Chochem Muvuk. Bechbet Rishus.
He was so bothered when they were being mechabed him. It got him very upset, and then back from sein Olam Haba. This.
We knew exactly what the Rebbe is going to do. It was not a surprise. Oh, sit down. And you had to listen. It wasn't like he made a spiel. He expected to be listened to.
But he recognized that, whether it was good or not, and whether it would entail kavod or not, there were times that he had to step forward because he was the person who had been given certain kishreinis by the Eibishter, and that he was therefore able to articulate in ways that others couldn't, and therefore if something had to be said, he would come forward and he would say it.
He was very involved in his yeshiva, and the klal was a good... with all this, the Rebbe had a personal relationship with many, many people. And I was zeicha to have that personal relationship also with the Rebbe.
Everyone realized his tremendous abilities, his pick, his talents, but his obvious Yisrael. I mean, you can't beat it.
He never tried to show off as a Besabbas Chacham. He tried to be as close as possible to every Jew.
That smile was so dazzling. It just knocked you off your feet with ava, with warmth, with love.
My children were thinking of moving from Indianapolis to Eretz Yisrael. They came and they visited him and they discussed it with him. And he guided them, he gave them direction. Then he took two of my Einikel, the two others, and he gave them a hug and he gave them a bracha. And my granddaughter, my 8-year-old granddaughter, was standing on the side, and he looked at her and he said, "Consider yourself hugged."
Get a call. Yaakov Perla here. Yaakov Perla here. Yes. Chasna, I need some help. What? I want to go over all the names from Washington Heights. I want to make sure I didn't leave someone out. He starts reading this one. He mentioned the name. I said, Rebbe. The very person that was a little bit odd, a little bit... He says, sure, he has feelings too. Of course I invited him.
The Rebbe had a Talmud that lived in Denver that came in for a family simcha, and he came to visit the Rebbe. He saw the Rebbe was turning up 16th Avenue, heading down towards McDonald Avenue, towards Dayhill, and he quickly ran over to offer the Rebbe a ride to where he was going, and they came to a grocery store. The Rebbe went into the store and came in, and the family there, the husband and the wife that was there, greeted the Rebbe very warmly, and then the Rebbe took out a piece of paper, a large 8.5 by 11 paper, in where he had drafted an advertising sign for a poster that this family should advertise for themselves. The Novominsker Rebbe, the Gadol B'Yisrael, who was walking towards Kensington to present this poster that he had drafted upstairs in his dining room on his table for this mishpacha, so that they should be able to have the parnasa that they needed.
My mother's family was a tremendous home of Chachmas Tzorchem and Gemilas Chasadim, and I think that had a major impact on what a Yid is supposed to do, and that's where he was very involved in individuals.
The conversation was very much like a father-son kind of conversation.
Someone asked him for a shus to move from Washington Heights. And I asked him, how could you advise someone to move? And he sat me down and said, Motche, sit down. When someone asks me an eitzah, I give him the eitzah I would give to my son.
And he answered them with chokhmah and wisdom.
This parent came to the Rebbe and asking for hadracha with an issue he was having with his child. And the Rebbe listened, and the Rebbe spoke to him and advised him. As he gets up to leave, this younger man tells the Rebbe, he said, I guess what we've discussed now is all part of Tzar Gidul Banim, about bringing up a child. The Rebbe got very serious when he heard that. And he said, my friend, what we've discussed now is Gidul Banim, bringing up children. If you want to see Tzar Gidul Banim, you'll come with me to the hospital wards.
He could grasp everything just like that and come up with the most intelligent reasons and answers.
He was a combination of a moyach, he was a smart person, he was a gifted person intellectually. At the same time, he had a breite heart. He was a very emotional person. He was able to empathize with people.
We used to go to the Rebbe and we'd sit down and we'd talk to him about something. And he asked, what are you doing? And so on. And he would smile at us and be into it. And then we'd tell him about a certain sorrow problem, and a groan would issue from his throat. And you'd see he really cared when Klal Yisrael had tzara.
Or a woman didn't have children, or someone who lost children, chas v'shalom, these things, it upset him very much. It hurt him very deeply. Sometimes he would express himself, I don't know if I'll be able to hear any more problems. It hits me so deeply.
The Rebbe loved Eretz Yisrael. He used to say in every speech, Rosh Yom Kippur, Medafen Zin hum in the Brides and Schwesters in Eretz Yisrael. He worried about them. He collected for them.
The Rebbe was a Gabbai Tzedakah, in where many people gave the Rebbe hundreds and hundreds and thousands of dollars to be able to give out to all those who were in need of tzedakah inyanim. It was literally hundreds and hundreds of dollars that the Rebbe would disperse every single day. And then when the last person would leave, the Rebbe would just sit down and just break out in tears. He says, Wie kemen nicht weinen?
No Gabolim, picking up the phone himself. Many people call me, how can I get hold of the Rebbe? call 436-1133. If he's there, he'll pick up the phone.
One of the things I always noticed, if anybody came to the door, he made a point of getting up himself, even though it was very difficult for him to walk in the later years.
The Rebbe had no signs on his door. He lived on the third floor of an apartment building in 47th Street, and people would knock on his door a whole day. But it became a pressure on him, and he asked me one day, he asked me to put up a sign outside his door to limit the times of visitation. And I wrote the sign in Hebrew, and I wrote that the times would be ach v'rak, at these times in the morning, afternoon, and evening. And I put the sign up outside the door, and I went back to my office, which was on the second floor. 5 minutes later, the Rebbe calls me, and he asked me, why did I have to put such a stringent wording that ach v'rak, only at this particular time can you come to me. I put another one up. Instead of writing ach v'rak, I just put rak. 5 minutes later, I get a call from the Rebbe. He said, Lipa, do me a favor. Take down the sign. He said, you put there rak. What happens if a person will come half an hour after the time or 10 minutes after the time? They'll see that sign and they'll turn around and go away, but nobody will have helped them. He said, I can't have that on my shoulders.
The Rebbe used to say, "Was meintest du zu sein ein ehrlicher Jid?" It means to be an honest Jew. Honest with Hashem, honest with others, and above all, honest with yourself.
He would quote always, explaining a Rambam, that the reason a person has to be beicher be'emes is mipnei shehu emes. Truth is a value in and of itself. No ulterior motives for promoting truth. He has to remember that the eyes of the world are upon him and that we are ambassadors for HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Whatever we did, whether we were dealing with government funding, whether dealing with foundation funding, private funding, everything had to be done erlich, everything had to be done above board.
The Rebbe had a tzedakah pinkis upstairs in his private office in his apartment. Every single night he would record every single dollar to the penny that he had given out that particular day. He had a cheshbon of what came in, and he had a cheshbon of what went out, and at the end of each day, that cheshbon was equal to what he had given out.
He once told us that we had to turn down a $150,000 grant that we could have received because he felt that it schmecked a little bit of not ehrlichkeit.
The Rebbe truly believed that the role of every Yid was to do the Ratzon of the Eibishter. We're put on the world to do the Ratzon of the Eibishter. As modest as he was, by the way, he was unassuming, but he also knew his abilities and he shared it.
His life was not his. He felt his purpose of his life was to be marbe k'vayit shemayim in this world.
And he always emphasized that we have to do for the klal.
If you are not informed about these stories, why aren't you? Where's your sense of achrayus for Klal Yisrael?
Many people saw that and they said, you know what, maybe we could do more.
Remember once, in the end of the summer, he gave the drasha for the Bachrim what their mission is. Starting from Churban Ma'is Rishon, going through the whole history of Klal Yisrael and where they fit in and what the Eibishter wants from them. And we're all here for a mission. We're not here to enjoy ourselves. We're here for a mission. And remember, the Olam was blown away. Such types of drashas wouldn't be able to be as rich and as nice as they were if it wasn't from a person that's involved in the Yonai Klal.
In 2008, the financial crisis hit, and at the Aguda convention, we got together in the Rebbe's suite to discuss what to do. The Rebbe came up that we should form EPI, Emergency Parnas Initiative, and he insisted that the word emergency should be in it, to help Yidden find jobs, start businesses, and he has been behind it until his last day.
He was always asking himself what should be done. That was, I think, the motto in his life. What has to be done for the moment?
Because he was the Rosh HaMedabrim, and because he was very much out in the public eye, then not only did he get covered, but also he got criticism from time to time. So one day he turned to me and he said, you know what people say, that if things get too hot, go out of the kitchen. But Chaim David, you and I, we can't leave the kitchen. We have to take the heat.
Sometimes there were demonstrations in front of his house. Sometimes he would get nasty calls on the answering machine. And he used to tell me about different cases. I understand these people. They're people who are hurt, and I can't blame them, but I got to do what I think is right.
He told me once, as hard as it was to move to Borough Park, to move out of Washington, he was very happy there. He was really on top of the world. He had a yeshiva, he didn't have fundraising. He told me when his father was nifta, nothing else in the world mattered to him but that shtibel of Novominsk. My father brought it over from Europe, and if anything were to happen to that, chotosi la'avi kol hayomim, those were his words, chotosi la'avi kol hayomim. And I always felt, because that lishma, that total dedication, it was like this unbelievable hatzlacha in building up Novominsk into a yeshiva as well, Shem L'Tiferes.
My son, who I have a ben Yochid, became bar mitzvah, was getting ready for high school. And the decision whether to go out of town or to different yeshivas in New York, I said clearly he's going to Novominsk, which had started 2 years before, because I was so impressed with the Rebbe as a total person. I said, that's the individual who I want to influence my son in his growth in Yiddishkeit.
The Rebbe was a very busy person. And I'm the yeshiva, I'm the mashgiach and the Rebbe, 10, 12 hours a day. The way it usually goes, a person asks somebody else when he meets him, how are you doing? In Yiddish, was herzig bei dir? He used to ask me, was herzig bei mir? What, yeshiva is mir. It's me.
He believed it with the full emunah that boys today, with all the struggles out there, that they're throwing themselves into learning, they are so choshev, and he used to say it all the time.
How many times he told me, Shimshi, look at those bachrim down in Shemanasa. Such a ehrliche bachrim. My heart goes out to them.
His talents were so clear that every organization that I can think of wanted him to be part of it, and eventually they actually wanted him to be the head of the organization on the rabbinical side. He was on the rabbinical board, of course, of Torah, which his wisdom was just phenomenal for that type of a ma'asid. He was in Chidchatz Maya, happened to be involved with Rapam at that time, and Shuvu wanted him. When they started Keren Nesivos Moshe, it was in his apartment that was Nebuch when Reb Shira was nifter, and you had Reb Steinman and Baal Chaim Tovim, the Ger Rebbe, came from Eretz Yisrael, and they started this new ma'asid in the Rebbe's apartment with his own wife Nebuch sick in the hospital. He was just the focal point of where everyone wanted to be.
After the P'tir of Rabbi Shera, the Novominsker Torah got together in Rav Pam's house. Agudas Yisrael is a big ship. It's a battleship. It battles for the rights of Haredim from Yidden. It battles for the rights of the yeshivas. It battles for Kiddush Hashem. And a ship needs a captain. They looked around the room and they chose that person who personified Agudas Yisrael, who always spoke about he accepted this role because it was a continuation of what his forefathers had created. And yet, he was an American. He understood America. He was able to talk to America. And so they chose to be the Rosh Agudas Yisrael. They chose the Novominsker Rebbe.
Rav Shveitz was the one who convinced him to take the role of the Rosh Agudas Yisrael. He felt the Rebbe was the only one that could unite all of the various factions of Klal Yisrael.
And what was also interesting is he knew the history of Agudas Yisrael intimately from the inside. Because as a child, he had actually gone to all of those conventions, those legendary conventions you hear about, the Reb Lazer Silver and all of that. In the 1940s and 1950s, he went to all of them, and he remembered them, and he told us all about them.
In the 1970s at the Aguda Convention, there was a recurring problem that was discussed many years later also. And so the Novominsker at that time, people like Rav Hut, Rav Ruderman, and Reb Yaakov, Reb Moshe, assigned the young Novominsker, at that time he wasn't the Novominsker Rebbe, at that time he was Reb Yaakov Perla, to make the set of guidelines.
He was the Reish HaMedabrim in Agudas Yisrael, and I'm sure for many other places as well. What was on his mind to talk about were the issues of the day.
Whether it was discussing reform and conservatism, the achrayus of Balabatim to step up to the plate, to make sure that Klal Yisrael can accomplish things that have to be done.
If the Rebbeinu Shalom has given us this tchiyah to face up and confront the problem of special children of learning disabilities and we feel that something ought to be done, then the challenge falls upon every single yochid.
He felt his mechuyv to say what has to be said. And he felt in every dosha that he said, he has to be spoken out, he has to say it.
Despite the fact that it might cause controversy, and besides the fact that there might be some people who might want to support Agudas Yisrael because of it, but he felt that it had to be said, and he said it.
In many centrist communities, a new plague called open orthodoxy is lowering the barriers that define Torah life in the Munah, in Beseres Aviseinu, and basic tenets of Ikri Hayadus.
It was remarkable to listen to his speeches at the conventions. Inevitably, they were like State of the Union addresses. There was a certain majesty about them and a certain coherency of vision.
The day of his speech, it was known you didn't go to him, you didn't talk to him, because he was so focused on every single word that he was going to say, because he was delivering a message to Klal Yisrael. And you don't deliver a message to Klal Yisrael by just sitting off the cuff and writing something down at the last minute. You sit and you think and you write every word down, because every word was gold to him.
Finally, at long last, the etzem discussion of this inyan was brought to the surface, that we decided once and for all that we are not going to sweep the problem under the carpet.
The Rebbe many times had his eyes closed, but if you think about it, he was probably just envisioning things far beyond what a simple person would be seeing, and that's what helped make him really a great leader.
The Rebbe was involved in every single aspect of every single Motz's decision that Agudas Yisrael made for the last 22 years, and probably beyond that.
On the one hand, he was so respected by even all the other members.
I disagreed with him many times, but I was convinced each of those times that he was right.
But he reciprocated.
Man kann sagen, aber Menschen ist nicht gestupt. Sagt nicht gestupt. And he was ready to listen what somebody else has to say.
Just because he was the Rosh Agudas Yisrael, he never acted as the Rosh Me'etzes Gedolei Torah. To him, he was part of a chabura, and he wanted to hear what others were thinking.
He was talented in so many areas. He was a good writer in English and in Hebrew. Extremely articulate, extremely able to express himself.
Every single time Klal Yisrael needed something, and you needed a statement going out to Klal Yisrael, it was drafted by the Rebbe himself. He drafted the statements. He didn't go say, find some writer and I'll look it over. He drafted the statements that went out to Klal Yisrael.
In this last Siyam HaShas, where we really saw the vision of the Rebbe coming up with the concept of Kihem Chayenu, that the Siyam HaShas is not just about celebrating one night. The Siyam HaShas is really to jumpstart every single Yid to take a responsibility for some learning. And the programs that the Aguda has been doing the last number of months, I think, reflect what was probably one of the last wishes of the Rebbe in terms of a global, a Klal Yisrael activity.
All these people here today, Mekarev u'Merachik, who have come from near and far to celebrate together and become re-inspired, they came to give wondrous expression to the words we say at Marav each night. V'nismach b'divrei salmo terosecha u'v'mitzvosecha l'yelem voed ki heim chayenu v'erech yameinu, for they nurture us with life, long life.
He worked for the Klal until the last day, until the last minute. And we all know how he was involved with Chaim David, with writing a letter just before his Patira.
Myself and Rebbe Shlomo Werdiger went to the Rebbe a few days before Pesach last year and said to the Rebbe, the Eilam, the community is looking for some chizuk. The Me'atzes Gedolei Torah really should say something to the community. And the Rebbe says, Chaim David Shlomo, I really don't have the koiches for this, but I understand I have the achrayas for this. You're right, the community does need to hear something, and I'll try to draft something.
In the week before he passed, he made contact and he spoke with all of the different groups that were near and dear to his heart. On the Sunday night, a week before the Histalkus, he spoke by telephone to the alumni. And he was joined by hundreds of alumni from all around the world. He also that week finished a series of shiurim that he gave every single year to the 9th grade Bochrim in the Haggadah. Thursday night, he gave a shiur to Washington Heights. And then on Erev Shabbos, he gave a shiur to his shul.
Friday morning, I get a phone call from the Rebbe that he decided after his shiur last night that he wanted to work on the statement, and he had a statement prepared. He had worked on it overnight. We got around 7 or 8 members of the Meyatzes at that time to sign off on it. Then it was a 5-paragraph statement issued by the Meyatzes Kedei Torah on Monday afternoon. A few hours after the statement was released, he was gone. The Eibshter took him. He didn't have the koiches, but he had the achrayas.
He pushed himself because he was a soldier. He took the responsibility for all of the people, all of the communities that he dealt with, and when it was all finished, that's when his avodah in this world finished.
It was such a tzar to see that he was nifter and nobody was a levaya. Because there would have been a throngs of people.
Everyone loved the Rebbe. Loved the Rebbe. Really, I mean, it wasn't respect alone, it wasn't admiration alone, it was love. We loved the Rebbe, and his going was a loss that we all felt tremendously. We know where to put ourselves, and we still don't.
I feel like an orphan now because I have many times questions, and I don't really know who I can really ask those questions to.
But I think it gives us an opportunity to really reflect and treasure back what we were zeicher to have all these decades.
We all felt that he was not just our Rebbe, but he identified with all of American Jewry, that he was really the Rebbe of Klal Yisrael within the American scene.
I think that's his main legacy that he left over to his Talmidim and to the world, an awareness of having the Eibshter in front of your eyes all the time, whether it was your own personal life or generally making Kiddush Hashem or Kvod Shemayim, as he used to say all the time.
The Eibshter gave us all koiches. There's no greater fulfillment of why HaKadosh Baruch Hu put you down on this earth. And the Rebbe embodied that in everything that he did throughout his life.